Ever look at a steak on your grill and just wonder, how did it get here? Well, it's way more than just food. It's the end result of this incredible biological and industrial journey. So let's follow that path and uncover the amazing science that turns living muscle into the meat on our plates.
So, what is that journey, really? What has to happen to make that transformation? It's this wild mix of biochemistry, super strict safety checks, and some really clever preservation methods. And today, we're going to break it all down.
You might think the story starts at the processing plant, but it actually begins way before that. The number one priority is the health and safety of the live animal. That really sets the stage for the quality of everything that comes after. So, after transport, the animals are brought to a special holding area, and it's called the lairage. Now, this isn't just some waiting room. It's a really crucial step. It lets the animals rest, calm down, and just settle. This reduces their stress, which is not only vital for their welfare, but also prevents some pretty bad effects on the meat quality later on. And while they're in the lairage, every single animal goes through a live inspection. It's called the ante-mortem inspection. Vets are looking for any tiny sign that an animal isn't 100% healthy. We're talking about their posture, the way they walk, their breathing, anything. If an animal is flagged as suspect, it gets pulled aside for a much closer look. This is basically the first critical firewall that protects our food supply. Okay, now for the really amazing part. Once an animal is slaughtered, this whole cascade of biochemical changes kicks off, turning that living, working muscle into what we actually recognize as meat. And that whole transformation is driven by a process you've probably heard of, rigor mortis. Here's how it goes down. First, blood stops flowing, so the oxygen supply to the muscles is cut off. Then the muscle's energy source, this molecule called ATP, gets all used up. With no oxygen, the muscle starts turning its stored sugar into lactic acid, which makes the pH drop. And that all leads to the final step. Without any ATP left to let go, the muscle's protein filaments lock together permanently. And that lockup is what causes the stiffness. So the difference this process creates is just night and day. Living muscle is flexible, it's full of energy. But after rigor mortis, it becomes stiff. It also loses some of its ability to hold on to water, which, by the way, is why you sometimes see that reddish fluid in a package of meat. That change is absolutely fundamental to the texture and quality of the final product. But just because the science is happening doesn't mean the safety checks are over. Oh no. The next step is an incredibly detailed post-mortem examination of the whole carcass and all the organs. At this stage, an inspector has to make a final call, and there are 3 possible outcomes. Fit for consumption, that's the all clear. Then there's total condemnation. This means the entire carcass has to be destroyed, usually because of a major disease like rabies. And finally, you've got partial condemnation, which is for smaller, localized issues. In that case, they just remove the affected part, and the rest is perfectly safe to go on. All right, once a carcass is officially deemed safe, a new clock starts ticking. Now it's a race against time to slow down any potential spoilage and preserve the quality and safety of the meat. And the 2 main ways to do that are chilling and freezing. Chilling is great for slowing down spoilage, but there's a catch. If you chill the meat too fast before rigor mortis is complete, you can get something called cold shortening. It's this massive muscle contraction that makes the meat incredibly tough. Freezing, on the other hand, pretty much stops the clock entirely. And what's really cool is how you freeze it matters. Fast freezing creates tiny little ice crystals that keep the texture nice. Slow freezing, that makes big, jagged crystals that can actually damage the muscle cells. Beyond just keeping it fresh, there's aging, which is all about boosting tenderness and flavor. With dry aging, big cuts of meat are hung in a special cooler for weeks. As they lose moisture, that beefy flavor gets super concentrated. The downside is you lose some weight. Then there's wet aging, which is way more common now. The cuts are vacuum sealed and aged in the bag. You don't lose any moisture, and you still get that tenderizing effect from the natural enzymes. Now, let's talk about the package itself. That simple tray of ground meat in the supermarket, it's a little piece of technology. The plastic wrap on top lets oxygen in, which keeps the meat a nice bright red, a color we all associate with freshness. Then you have vacuum packaging, which sucks out all the air, stopping the bacteria that need oxygen to grow. And then there's modified atmosphere packaging, or MAP, which goes even further. It replaces the regular air with a special mix of gases designed to keep the color perfect and stop microbes, making it last way longer on the shelf. So, we've covered the steaks and the roasts, but what happens to all the other parts of the animal? Well, in a modern facility, almost nothing goes to waste. We're now entering the world of byproducts. Byproducts are really broken down into two main groups. You have edible ones, like organ meats, liver, heart, and fats that are used to make things like lard. Then you have the inedible byproducts. This is stuff like hides for leather or bones and blood that get processed into a ton of other things, from animal feed to fertilizers. Want a really specific example? Take Ossian. This is basically the pure protein framework of bone. It's the collagen that's left after you use acid to strip away all the minerals. And what's it used for? It's the key ingredient for making gelatin. Yep, the stuff in gummy candies and even in medicine capsules.
And all of this brings us to the sheer economic scale of the whole industry. When you add up the value of the meat and all of these byproducts in India, the total annual value is a mind-boggling 79,889 crore rupees. A number that big just hammers home how important it is to use every single part of the animal.
So, from the careful handling of the animal, through the complex dance of biochemistry, past all the rigorous safety checks, and into the high-tech world of preservation, the journey to our plate is way more complicated than most of us ever stop to think about. So the real question is, now that you know the whole story, does it change how you see your next meal?